Hey, what's up? Dave with Brazos Valley Strength. Today we're going to be making the next installment in all of the videos leading up to my complete tutorial on bench press. So, as I've mentioned before, those videos require a lot of legwork ahead of time to be able to actually make them short enough to be able to consume. So there's some videos coming in the pipeline that are going to add up, culminating in a complete how to bench press guide. So I wanted to mention that right off the bat here because a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about today lack some context, right? This is going to be a bigger piece of the puzzle. So I'm going to try to make it as cohesive as possible within the context of specifically what I'm saying, but there's a ton more that we need to talk about coming up. So if you have questions, leave them in the comments. I think a lot of times I'll just have to wait until that bigger video, but anyway, it'll help me know really where there's blind spots from my end. So today we're going to be talking about wrist position on the bench press. I've made an old video about this before. By the way, if you do have questions, my how to or my bench press playlist within this has a lot of my old videos. So things like bar path, and there's bar path and elbow flare, those will definitely factor in here. This video that I'm making right now, there's an old video on this. I just think I can probably do a better job now. So with the bench press and the grip position, I think the whole reason that I even have to make this video at all is bad coaching from other people, and specifically the common online cues, advice for people to keep their wrists as straight as they possibly can. That's bad. Don't do it. Right? So even within what I'm going to say here today, as usual, there's going to be some individual preferences. Now, my bias for sure is that bending the wrist back a little bit more is better than having it too straight. Now, that's not binary, right? It's not just broken back or just straight. There's degrees in which people can get away with or be successful with, and we'll try to come up with really what those things affect. So just to start off with, why I think having the wrist broken back, the biggest reason why having it broken back is significantly better than being straight is actually the reason people tell you to make it straight in the first place. It's that it actually does stack the bar on top of your forearm. So if we look at my palm on top of my wrist, when my hand is perfectly straight, right, as straight as I can, we'll say the back of my hand is really what we're looking at right here. If my hand is perfectly straight and I put the barbell in my hand there, it's not on top of my forearm. It's off of my support there, right? So we're already putting you in a bad position, even excluding any sort of biomechanics that we're going to talk about in the bench press. It's just not stacked on top of your forearm. So if you're actively trying to keep your hand, your wrist as square as you possibly can, you're really doing yourself a disservice. And I think a lot of the times the advice is to put the bar as low across your palm as you possibly can, and then along with that, make a really straight hand. And again, I just think that we're lacking, I don't know, it's like we're missing the forest for the trees. We're saying we're trying to make this joint as stable as I can. We're going to stack my wrist that's stable. Yeah, but there's a bar there that has to be supported. So anyway, I think if you're actively making choices to make your wrist straighter, you're probably going in the wrong direction. But you should be looking at the concept, the efforts that those people are trying to say. And yes, we should have the bar stacked on top of people's forearms, but that happens just by breaking it back just a little bit. Now, as far as the advice about putting the bar as low and potentially diagonal across people's, palms as much as they can, the heel of their hand, I would say I generally agree with the angle of that rotation, right? People are saying that they want it very, very low in the hand and very internally rotated. That stuff is going to be more covered in the complete guide to bench pressing and talking about how we do want some internal rotation on the bench press, particularly on the ascent of the press. And that generally speaking, having the hand oriented a little bit internally will help the mechanisms of the press overall. And I think that will help having that understanding that having some degree of internal rotation here will really get people started. I'm not saying that we want the bar to sit like squarely across the, the base of the fingers or something and just have the bar broken back. So I think if people just start as easily as saying we want the first two fingers to be gripping the bar relatively hard and sitting comfortably between the thumb and the index finger, we're off to a good start. So this video, I think, could potentially end there, but we can break down really what we're looking at. So even before we go there, I think we do need to talk about wrist wraps a little bit. Surprisingly, this is another one of those to where even some more experienced lifters I see sometimes doing some really weird stuff with their wrist wraps, particularly wrapping their wrist wraps below their hand, right? Just kind of around the wrist portion. So I'll demonstrate this, how to put these on. By the way, these are the new SBD line. And I do make these videos for free, so if you do like the stuff, the information here, you can support me very easily by, if you're already picking up some of the SBD stuff or whatever, just use the link in the description below and that'll help support the channel. So anyway, the biggest mistake is that people are wrapping their wrists below their hand. When we're putting on wrist wraps, the goal is not to have the wrist wrap make your hand straight. It's to support the hand in the position that we want it in. And for that reason, I would totally recommend the soft, I think they're called soft, maybe flexible wraps by SBD. I think a lot of times people go after the stiffest wraps thinking that more stiffness is going to be better, but it doesn't allow you to get into the positions that we really want to have. So anyway, to break this down, we always want to start, I'm doing my left hand right here. We want the thumb loop to be in a position to where I'm wrapping it away from my thumb. The big deal is this thumb loop does have to come off at the end. That's easiest to do when I just lay my thumb flat and pull it off across. If I go the other way, it's gonna be really, really difficult for me to get that thumb loop off. I think other people sometimes do wrist wraps different, even putting around their pinkies or whatever. I think this is really the easiest way. So make sure when you're starting your wrist wrap that you start off with it relatively tight. There's gonna be some individual preferences here. I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, I like my wrist wraps maybe around a 5 or 6 tightness. They wouldn't be comfortable to wear for extended periods of time, but my hands are not really going numb before sets. So we start there. Make sure that you start it off pretty tight to get this first layer pretty flush with your hand. I start off with my first loop going down below my hand just to get an even flush fit against there, and then I'll start working it beyond that. So starting off just below my palm right here, but then from there I wrap it up and across my hand to where it gets a little bit higher, and then down below my thumb. My second wrap, I take even higher than that, so now I have it pretty flush, and again, I have to pull this tight the whole time. So I'm keeping it 5 or 6 out of 10, and up halfway across my hand is really what I'm going for, and then down below my thumb. From here, we have a few more options. I tend to just start stacking my wrist wrap on top of my wrist, right, kind of in between the two wraps that I just made, and keeping it relatively tight. And then from there, I just kind of work it to wherever I feel like I have gaps, up or down or whatever, right? But generally stacked right on top of everything. And then I have a nice wrap. The flexible wraps from SBD will allow you to settle into this position here where stiff wraps really may not. The stiff wraps also won't sit quite as flushly and a lot of times kind of dig into people's skin and everything. From here, pretty easy. You just pop the wrist wrap off and you're good to go. So once you have your wrist wraps, you should be much more comfortable doing all of the things that I'm saying here, letting the bar kind of settle into your hand, into your wrist just a little bit. Because I think to start off with, that's one of people's biggest hesitations is that they're just kind of uncomfortable letting the bar relax into their hands just a little bit. So beyond that, some of the main advantages that we get from having the bar or our wrists broken back just a little bit is it allows what is a better bar path for almost everybody. Having your wrist broken back a little bit will allow a lower touch point, which allows a shorter range of motion because our chest rises lower rather than directly on top of our shoulders. So we can touch more comfortably a little bit lower, and I'll dive into that because there's some other reasons there. But along with that bar path, It allows a much, much more comfortable position for our elbows to flow. If we get really, really squared off, it forces a lot more of that internal rotation. And so along with just the total range of motion that people have to have, right, relative to, I don't know, the vertical range of motion of the barbell, but it requires so much more range of motion right around the shoulder joint. If I'm going straight down, as I have to with the more straight wrists, that range of motion specifically around that joint is really burdensome for a lot of people. So this is just another way, along with my last video on bench press with sinking versus the soft touch, that just by doing this, we can increase longevity of bench pressing for so many people. So just the natural angle, a little bit of reduction in the range of motion, all of these things add up to making the bench way more comfortable, way more successful, way more repeatable. And so I don't know if there's specific body types or anything that really benefit from a more stacked, well, we'll say more straight wrist, I guess, without the stacked barbell. But there are for sure people that do very, very well with having the wrist a little bit straighter, kind of going more straight down. I can think of a few people off the top of my head. I know Rondell Hunt may be one of the main ones that kind of takes that straight bar path and is a super strong bencher. But I think, it'd be easy to find some of these people that are a little bit more outliers and kind of ignore the population of a whole, really finding their success with the wrist broken back. Now, I do think one of the main limitations with this a lot of times is really just in how people hear what I'm saying here and thinking about the wrist breaking back. And I think a lot of times people think that it should be much more passive than what it really is. And that's why I started off earlier in the video talking about how it should be the first two fingers kind of gripping the bar, and that really creates a much better position, kind of natural position. And that is, I think, where a lot of people really miss this, is they see some people breaking their wrist back and they try to accomplish it. And then it ends up just being that they're just letting their wrist relax and the bar sit kind of dead in their hands. And I don't think that is what should be happening. I do think that we should be fairly active overall with our grip. But if we put the bar in the right spot, kind of, in the middle between my thumb and my index fingers, I can still get a good grip on the bar and still have that active grip, even squeeze it as much as I really want to. I think that there can be some personal preference with how much people actually squeeze the bar, but we can still have a very active, strong grip with this. And I know for me, one of the best things that helps me is just gripping the bar hard, especially when I unrack, and then having that aggression. And from there, I get the bar where I want it, and then I kind of let it settle into that position overall. So we can still be aggressive, we can still be active with our hands and not feel like we're losing some of that, power overall. So beyond all that, one of the biggest things is just the ability with that touch point allowing a little bit more, the lower position on the chest. Then from there, we have the leverage to actually press the bar back. And I think that is, along with the ability to touch low versus forcing people to touch high with the more straight grip, that allows all of these things to kind of mesh. So if we're looking at that, the reason it allows that little bit more horizontal bar path with the little J path that I'll dive into in another coming video, it allows that to happen because the orientation of the bar, let me see, maybe there's a different hand. The orientation of the bar above the forearm is either gonna be right on top of the forearm or potentially closer to our shoulders. So if the bar is closer to our shoulders and we're touching lower on our chest, we have leverage over the barbell to actually be able to move it back. And so if we're touching lower on our chest, which ultimately ends up being higher, from there, if I press the bar back just immediately without it going vertically at all, if it just goes straight back over my shoulders, from that position, I've already gained an advantage over the straight down range of motion. I've kind of skipped a few inches at least from my shoulders to that position that I'm able to get the bar. I'm essentially cheating the bench press, right? I'm reducing some of the range of motion, along with it usually feeling significantly better and stronger for most people just with how the joints work around there. So without that leverage, If your hand is perfectly, your hand being the back of your hand here, is perfectly stacked and you try to touch low on your chest, we always end up dumping the bar, right? That now the bar is closer to my hips than it is my shoulders. And I can't maintain, I don't have any leverage to be able to push the bar effectively on top of my shoulders. And a lot of times this is where people really feel like they're getting stuck around their chest. And they think, oh, how do I create more strength off my chest? Well, you create better leverage to allow yourself that ability to get the bar moving back towards the rack and to just have control over the bar the whole time. So as far as individual differences go, I think a lot of it comes down to grip width, and I'm not gonna spend a whole lot of time going into really what happens with the grip width and everything, but I would say generally speaking, the closer the grip, the more squared off you're gonna end up being. Your elbows just don't wanna flare quite so much out or in there, I guess. The grip can be a little bit closer. Your elbows will generally be a little bit tighter to your body during the whole rep, and your elbows will reflect that. But we will also generally have more of that horizontal displacement during those reps with a closer grip. So for sure, we still want to break the wrist back, and a lot of times it may sit a little bit higher. As grip widths go out, we're going to need a little bit more internal rotation. And I think that's where really feeling kind of the first two fingers is really what will help people find a good spot. And we're still going to have some of that internal rotation. We're always going to have internal rotation with the bench press. It'll just be more profound the wider the grip goes. So your grip will internally rotate, right? So this is internal rotation, external rotation, but it will internally rotate slightly more the wider we go. But that wrist position, I don't really think that we need to think much more beyond that. I know I said that the closer grip will have a slightly more broken back wrist position, but I think that just kind of happens naturally going along with the need for horizontal displacement on your body. And I think that is probably the biggest thing to look at. If you're somebody who's bench pressing totally vertically, you may want to try this. Try seeing if a lower touch point can help your bench press. But a lower touch point will only be feasible for you if you allow your wrist to break back a little bit so that you can get to that lower position, so that your elbows can lead the way a little bit, and so that you have the leverage to be able to move the bar backwards over your shoulders. And that's ultimately what this comes down to. So the two biggest things are that it actually does stack the bar on top of your forearm, and then from there, it allows you more options as far as reduced range of motion and leverage over the barbell to be able to consistently hit that right spot and be effective with your bench press and hopefully increase longevity. So if you did like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll see you next time.